All right, so today we're diving into some pretty murky waters, huh? The Russia-Ukraine conflict. You'd think, at least from a religious standpoint,
Hmm.
things would be kind of clear-cut, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
But turns out it's a whole lot more complicated than that.
Mm.
We're seeing some traditional Catholics siding with Russia, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
Right.
And get this, our main source is an article written by an Orthodox Christian, no less, who makes a really, really compelling case.
It's a fascinating perspective for sure. And to really understand where he's coming from, we kind of got to start with the author's own background, right?
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
He's Orthodox Christian, as you mentioned, and a big part of why he's pro-Russia is this, well, let's just say he's got a very dim view of the West.
Dim how? Like morally...
Morally bankrupt, actually. That's how he sees it.
Yeah.
Like, beyond repair.
Wow, he doesn't pull any punches. Okay, so how does that tie into traditional Catholics supporting Russia, though? Seems like a bit of a stretch.
It all comes down to worldview. He sees Russia as this, I don't know, like a shield, a barrier against this moral decay he sees in the West. So anyone backing Russia, they're kind of, in his eyes, opposing the West and its influence by default, you know?
So he's cool with it, even if those traditional Catholics have different reasons. Like, we'll get into this whole Fatima prophecy thing later, but...
Exactly. It's not even that he's just cool with it. It's more like he uses this term. He calls traditional Catholics who support Russia useful idiots.
Oh, wow. Useful idiots. That's something. And it doesn't sound like he's just happy to have them on board either. What's the deal with that? What's he getting at?
To get that, you got to look at it alongside his take on Russia's history with Catholicism. And well, let's just say it's complicated. His argument is Russia's always kind of defined itself against the West.
Okay.
And by extension, against the Catholic Church. He brings up figures like Prince Alexander Nevsky, fought against Catholic crusaders way back 13th century. Point is, this antagonism, it's got deep roots.
So this isn't some recent squabble.
Yeah.
Centuries of baggage here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I still don't see how that makes those Catholics useful idiots, though.
Because he thinks they're missing the bigger picture, you know. They're so focused on this Fatima prophecy, which we'll get into that they're not seeing the historical reality. His argument is that Russia, it's never truly embraced Catholicism.
Right.
And it's unlikely to start now, even if they win this whole thing.
Sounds like he's saying they're letting wishful thinking cloud their judgment. But why is he so riled up about it? Is it just about being historically accurate, or is there something more, like, emotional fueling this?
It goes way beyond history. Don't forget, the author's Orthodox Christian. He feels deeply connected to Orthodox Christians in Ukraine, especially with them being caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, of course.
So he sees traditional Catholics siding with Russia, and to him, that's like turning their backs on their Ukrainian Uniate brethren, who are essentially their fellow Catholics.
He sees it as a betrayal, then. On a personal level, almost.
100%. He even straight up says to them, where's your Christian charity in all this? He questions why they'd support Russia over Ukrainians who are suffering, who share their faith.
He's playing the loyalty card, the solidarity card. Powerful stuff. This is really fascinating, by the way, but before we get too far, let's back up. This Fatima prophecy. It seems to be a big deal for why some traditional Catholics are pro-Russia.
Right.
Can you break that down? What is it, and why does it matter so much to them?
Sure. The Fatima prophecy, it all goes back to these Marian apparitions, basically. Appearances of the Virgin Mary supposedly happened in Fatima, Portugal, back in 1917.
Right.
3 shepherd children witnessed them, and they claimed there were messages, prophecies, you know, and one of them specifically mentioned Russia.
So not just some vague spiritual mumbo-jumbo. They named names.
Yeah.
I get why people paid attention.
Yeah.
So what did it say about Russia?
It said that Russia would spread her errors throughout the world, and that would lead to wars, persecution of the church, the whole 9 yards.
Gloomy stuff.
Yeah, but there's a second part. It also said, in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. Catholics often interpreted that as meaning Russia would eventually convert, become Catholic.
So it's a prophecy with a warning, but also hope, I guess. No wonder there are different interpretations, especially now.
Exactly. Some traditional Catholics, they see what Russia's doing in Ukraine now, and they're like, see, spreading errors, causing conflict, just like the prophecy said. But they're also holding on to that second part, hoping Russia will have a change of heart, convert, and bring about peace and religious unity.
Like a kind of out of the ashes sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of apocalyptic when you think about it. But here's where our author jumps back in, right? He's saying, hold on, this whole Fatima thing, it's blinding them to the reality of Russia's history.
Don't hold your breath waiting for them to turn into the Vatican East, basically.
Pretty much. And it's this clash of worldviews, each side using history, faith, to back up their positions. That's what makes this whole thing so fascinating to me.
Absolutely. So we've got our author, Orthodox Christian, saying history shows Russia's inherently against Catholicism.
Hmm.
And then you've got these traditional Catholics looking at the Fatima prophecy, hoping for a Russian Catholic utopia.
Right, and it shows how, especially in times like these, you can take the same events, the same history, even the same prophecies, and come to completely different conclusions.
Wow.
It really makes you think twice about, well, the power of what we choose to believe, you know?
Yeah, totally. It's like they're on different planets,
Ah.
even though they're talking about the same stuff, Russia, the war, even this Fatima prophecy.
And for the author, this isn't just some theoretical debate. He sees real consequences, especially for Ukrainians who are stuck in the middle of all this.
Right, and he paints a pretty bleak picture if Russia wins, and not just for Ukraine itself, but for Catholicism in the region.
He does. His point is Russia throughout history, never really a welcoming place for Catholicism. Even when things were, I don't know, relatively tolerant, it was always this foreign thing, Western, definitely not Russian.
So this idea some traditional Catholics have about Russia becoming some kind of Catholic safe haven after the war,
Yeah.
he's saying, forget about it.
To put it mildly, he says, for Catholicism to actually thrive in Russia, it'd mean basically rebuilding the whole country from scratch. Their whole identity would have to change. He even says, think about it, maybe it's more moral to support the good guys, even if they're going to lose, than to back the bad guys who might win.
Whoa, that's a heavy statement. He's saying siding with Russia is just plain wrong, even if you think they'll be on top.
Yeah.
But what about Ukrainians who do support Russia? How does that fit into his whole Russia the oppressor thing?
He knows it's not so simple, the history between Russia and Ukraine, especially with what happened under the Soviets. They both suffered. He brings up stuff like the Holodomor, that horrible famine Stalin basically engineered, killed millions of Ukrainians back in the 1930s. So he's not sugarcoating anything.
He acknowledges the dark side of things,
Right.
but he also seems to be saying, hey, they went through some stuff together. They have their shared Orthodox faith. That's got to mean something, right?
Exactly. He's appealing to this idea that they're connected beyond just borders and politics, you know, shared history, shared faith. Shouldn't that matter, especially now?
Clever tactic. Use the shared past to try to smooth over the current mess. But kind of manipulative too, isn't it? Like he's using it for his own purposes.
It's definitely complicated, no doubt. But it makes you think about how we remember history and how those memories get used to tell stories about what's happening now.
It's like he's saying, don't let the West tell you who your friends are supposed to be. Remember what you went through together. Remember your faith.
And that's where he brings up this idea of friend and enemy. He gets it from this political theorist, Carl Schmitt. Schmitt said, we figure out who we are, partly by deciding who our enemies are.
So the author's using that to say Ukrainians should see Russia as their natural buddy, their friend in this Schmitt way of thinking, and the West is the bad guy.
Exactly. He says the West is just using Ukraine for its own games, but Russia, even with its problems, actually cares about the Orthodox Christian world, and that includes Ukraine.
Convincing argument? Maybe. But it kind of ignores some things about Russia, both now and in the past, that don't really fit that picture.
For sure. And that's what's so interesting about this article. It's not just straight up defending Russia or trash-talking the West. It's more like wrestling with really tough questions about loyalty, who you are, and what faith even means in the middle of a war.
And that's what makes it so hard to just brush it off. Even if you don't buy his conclusions, you got to give him credit for tackling these tough questions. But before we get lost in friend-enemy theory, let's loop back. You said he thinks it'd be more moral to support a doomed good cause than a winning bad cause. Can you explain that more? What does that even look like in this situation?
It really makes you think, right, about what it means to be moral. He's not saying you got to pick the side that's going to win. It's more like, do you stand by what you believe in, even if it means you're backing a losing horse?
So principles over practicality. Sticking to your guns, even when it's tough, even if there's a price to pay.
Exactly. And now look at it in the context of this war. He's asking traditional Catholics to really think about this. Supporting Russia, even if you believe in what they're doing, does it actually line up with your values? Especially knowing their track record and what could happen to Ukrainian Catholics.
Makes you stop and think. He's saying, don't just look at the right now. Think about the long game. Think about what you might be aligning yourself with.
Right. And remember, he is pro-Russia, but he's still calling them out.
Thanks for the support, but you're being a little naive. Something like that.
Pretty much. And you can tell he's especially disappointed that they're embracing Russia, a country that in his view, has always been against Catholicism. It's like he's saying, hello, history calling. Didn't they persecute your own people, oppose your faith at every turn, and now you're on their side?
He's not holding back.
Yeah.
But you can tell he really believes it. He thinks they're making a huge mistake siding with Russia.
Totally. And he's not afraid to say it either. He wants them to see what could happen because of their choices. Not just for them, but for the future of Catholicism, especially over there in Eastern Europe.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. But honestly, even if you disagree with him, I think this has been really important. We don't usually hear this side of the story.
Definitely. It's so easy to focus on the politics and forget about the human cost of this war, how it's affecting real people.
And the moral struggles people of faith are facing. Trying to make sense of it all. Trying to live their beliefs while this is happening.
Exactly. This deep dive has shown us that there are many different sides to this story. Even within the same religion, people see things completely differently.
And that maybe there isn't a right answer about who to support. It's a tough decision no matter what.
Absolutely. But if you ask the author, he'd say that wrestling with these questions, even if they're hard, that's what we need to do to even begin to understand what's going on.
He leaves us with this thought, and it's kind of unsettling. Maybe it's better to support the good guys even if they don't win than to be on the side of the bad guys even if they do. Makes you question everything.
For sure. It reminds us that sometimes the brave thing to do is stand up for what you believe, even when there's no hope, even if it costs you everything.
It really makes you think, and I bet our listeners have a lot to process after this deep dive. We've explored why some traditional Catholics support Russia, looked at the history, the religion, and some really tough moral dilemmas. As we've seen, there are no easy answers.
This is about so much more than just politics. It's about who we are, our beliefs, what we believe to be true. And it's a conversation that's going to keep going.
Absolutely. We hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, some new perspectives to consider as you continue to try and make sense of this ongoing conflict. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep with us.